They were told they couldn't fight, so they walked into a fortress that professional soldiers had refused to charge. On the evening of July 18, 1863, the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment took its place at the front of a Union assault on Fort Wagner, a massive Confederate fortification on Morris Island, South Carolina, guarding the approach to Charleston Harbor. The fort had walls of sand and timber 12 feet high. It was bristling with artillery and held by determined men. 2 previous Union assaults had already failed. Military commanders understood and said so privately that a frontal assault on Wagner was likely to be catastrophic. Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, the 25-year-old white officer commanding the 54th, asked that his regiment lead the charge. His men had asked the same thing. They understood what was at stake, not just the fort, but the argument that had been made since the war began, that black men could not fight, would not fight, would break and run when the shooting started. They had been given inferior pay, inferior equipment, and the constant message that they were inferior men. Fort Wagner was their answer. Shaw led them down the beach at dusk in a column 600 men wide, under artillery fire that began almost immediately. The sand around them exploded. Men fell. They kept moving. When they reached the fort's walls and began to scale them, Confederate defenders opened fire from above at point-blank range. Shaw reached the top of the parapet, turned to his men, and was shot dead. He was 25 years old. He had been married for 4 months. The regiment fought on without him. They held the parapet of Fort Wagner for almost an hour, in the dark, in close combat, against defenders who had the advantage of position and numbers. The men of the 54th fought with the particular ferocity of people who are fighting for more than ground. Sergeant William Carney, already wounded, carried the regimental flag to the top of the parapet and held it there, refusing to let it touch the ground, even as the assault failed and the survivors began to fall back, even as he was shot again and again. He brought the flag back. He was the first black soldier to receive the Medal of Honor. The 54th lost nearly half its men that night, 272 killed, wounded, or captured out of 600 who charged. They did not take the fort. The Confederates, intending contempt, buried Colonel Shaw in a mass grave with his fallen black soldiers. Shaw's family, when they learned of it, said, "Leave him there. There is no better burial for a man like Robert Gould Shaw than to lie with his men." What happened at Fort Wagner traveled faster than any military dispatch. The newspapers that had doubted, the politicians who had argued that black soldiers were unsuitable for combat, the citizens of both North and South who had accepted as common knowledge the idea that a black man would not stand and fight, all of them received the same report from Morris Island. The 54th Massachusetts had charged a fortified position that white regiments had declined to assault, had fought under artillery and point-blank rifle fire, had held the parapet for an hour, had lost nearly half their number, and had not broken. Frederick Douglass, who had 2 sons in the 54th, wrote that the battle had done more to establish the place of black Americans in the nation than anything that had come before. Abraham Lincoln, watching the political mathematics of the war shift, pointed to the performance of black regiments as one of the justifications for continuing the fight. The assault on Fort Wagner did not win the war. It did not even win the fort. Wagner fell 2 months later when Union forces cut off its supply lines without a second direct assault. But it won the argument. Not completely, not permanently. History does not work that cleanly, but enough to change what was possible. By the end of the Civil War, nearly 200,000 black men had served in the Union Army. Many of them cited the 54th Massachusetts as the reason they believed service was meaningful, the proof that the argument about whether black men could or would fight had been settled in sand and blood and darkness on a South Carolina beach on a July night. The men of the 54th Massachusetts were paid $10 a month. White soldiers of equivalent rank were paid $13. They protested this inequality formally and persistently, through their officers and through direct petition to the government. Colonel Shaw refused his own pay in solidarity with his men. The regiment served for 18 months without pay rather than accept the unequal rate. Congress equalized the pay in June 1864, backdated to the beginning of service. It was not a gift. It was overdue acknowledgement of what everyone already knew. They were not fighting for a country that treated them as equal. They were fighting for the idea that it should, and for the proof, rendered in the most unambiguous possible terms, that the arguments used to exclude them were lies. They gave everything at Fort Wagner and did not take the fort, but the men who came after them, the 200,000 who served, the generations who built lives on the ground that the war remade, came after them because of what they did in that hour on the parapet. Bravery has no color. They always knew that. On July 18, 2018-63, they made sure everyone else knew it too. The blood they spent that night bought something that no one could give back. They walked into that fortress to prove they were men. They proved it, and the nation, slowly, incompletely, with the particular reluctance of a country that has always had to be forced to its own stated ideals, eventually had to admit they were right.